Welcome to Liminal Radio. I'm Hatter.
And I'm Gray. Thank you for joining us for all the best rabbit holes of horror. And we have a really cool episode for you guys today. We have a guest host named Ty. Ty, go ahead and tell everybody kind of where you're from, what you do on the internet, and what you're here to talk about.
What's up, boys? My name is Ty Tiger. I met Gray through TikTok. He's been a guest on my podcast called the Tiger Nexus Podcast. I also do various different things like audio dramas, playing video games on YouTube, and I'm just a content creator in general. And I'm currently sat here in the UK, which means I'm currently 6 hours ahead of these two.
It is currently 11:19 p.m. there. It is 5:19 p.m. here. I haven't even had supper yet.
Which is the fun with time zones, and we have him with us all the way from the UK in order to talk about horror in comic books. And this is going to be great because we're going to be talking about dedicated horror comics, but we're also just going to be talking about the elements of horror that are present in every comic. And there is so much horror, and I think a lot of people don't necessarily realize how much horror there is just intrinsically peppered through even mainstream comics.
Oh, yeah. Batman, I would argue, is a horror comic series, but we'll have more on that a bit later.
And also for everyone, just as an addendum, whenever Ty says he is a content creator, he is underselling that. I think this man has like 500 YouTube channels, and they are all fantastic.
Oh, Jesus.
See, I'm also a content creator. I also do a little of everything. I've got, gaming. I do a bit of music. I talk about comics. But I only have the TikTok and the YouTube channel. I don't have 500 channels.
Ty, how many YouTube channels do you have?
If we're going to include all of my YouTube channels, the channels that I just kind of meddle with, and then my content creator group YouTube channel, we're currently sat at 25.
So you have me massively outclassed.
Did you say 25?
Yes, you did.
This must be how people feel when somebody describes the size of and they know that they can't possibly match up to that. I've never had that feeling, so it's good to know how it feels.
That's funny.
So circling back to our outline, as we often have to do, we're going to get right into talking about horror in comics. And as Hatter alluded to, one of the main ones you cannot talk about horror in comics without talking about is Batman, because as he said, and I completely agree, Batman is practically a horror comic with superhero undertones. So, Hatter, why don't you start us off with your opinion on the kind of elements of horror in Batman?
Well, there is a lot of horror in Batman. We've seen body horror. We've seen psychological horror. We've seen horror, if that can at all be described in a characters like the Scarecrow and the Yellow Lantern Corps. Although Yellow Lantern Corps would be DC at large, but as for Batman, we have the horror of just how he grew up, what happened to him as a child. He's just as insane as anybody in Arkham Asylum. The only reason he's out is because he uses his insanity to do good. And my God, some of the things I've seen in Batman cartoons as a child absolutely scarred me. And this, bear in mind, was a Y7 show back in the day. I remember Clayface really scared me when I was a kid.
Absolutely. I wanted to jump in because I wanted to mention Clayface because you mentioned body horror, and that's immediately where my mind went. Being a kid, watching this guy's face just melting was like one of my intros to body horror, and I just love Clayface as a character. One of my favorite Batman villains. We absolutely are going to talk about the Yellow Lantern Corps a little bit because when we get to DC at large, that's a huge one because their power is literally fear. And you also mentioned Scarecrow, and again, a character whose entire thing is based on fear. And the reason why I would say that Batman it has such deep horror roots is because Batman's character himself is based around fear. That's the entire thing. Bruce is afraid of bats, so he dressed as a bat to make criminals as afraid as he was. And I love that idea. That's something that really resonated with me as a kid. So, that's where the core of horror comes from, because fear is just one of the biggest themes in Batman.
Bruce Wayne would be a little screwed if he was scared of chipmunks.
I kind of here for Chipmunk Man, and also that's a bigger challenge. It's not that hard to make villains afraid of bats, but I respect the hell out of the man who can make you fear the chipmunk.
I'm kind of afraid of people who are fans of Squirrel Girl.
I think everyone's afraid of people who are fans of Squirrel Girl.
Hey, guys, gooners are people too.
So, do you have any thoughts to add to this, Ty?
Well, you mentioned the fact that Bruce Wayne, uses his own fear to put it on to other people. If you really think about it in a psychological sense, he's one of the darkest characters in the form of, he doesn't go to therapy. We never see him, talk to a psychiatrist. He doesn't take any medication. And one of my favorite lines is actually from a video game, actually, from Injustice 2. Robin, who's Damian Wayne at the time, is trying to ask Batman, why is Superman in the wrong for killing criminals? And there's a cutscene where Batman, just whams on this guard, like fist in his face. He knocks him out by punching him about 5-6 times. And Damian says, okay, so murder's not okay, but you're happy to bludgeon a guy to the point he may have brain damage. And that's a line that's always stuck with me, that Batman is willing, he won't kill anyone, but he's willing to cripple you to the point where you may not actually wake up again.
I'd also like to point out, I agree with everything you just said, but I want to point out when you said he never speaks to a psychiatrist, he speaks to a psychiatrist all the time. It's just to say, please don't hit me with your giant mallet. And she's like, oh, Bats, you're so funny. And then hits him with a giant mallet. So he does talk to a psychologist.
And you mentioned Scarecrow. One of my favorite things about him when it comes to fear is he knows Harley Quinn isn't affected by his fear toxin because she used to do it for like a drug, like just like someone doing cocaine. So he keeps on trying to make new formulas specifically to scare Harley Quinn.
Yeah, Harley Quinn's a bit too. Wow, Harley Quinn's a bit too scary. Wow. Okay, pausing. Harley Quinn's a bit too crazy to be scared.
Okay,
and she's nuts.
Go ahead. Sorry.
I was going to say, and she's nuts enough to actually, think as fear toxin as nothing as a drug. That's all it is to her. Is like someone doing cocaine or like cannabis or something. It's to her, it's no different to that.
Let me bring something up.
Go ahead, Hatter.
Just to bring something up here when it comes to the fear toxin. First of all, Scarecrow's my favorite Batman villain, bar none. Second of all, I am constantly on the internet looking at horror stuff, looking at scary things, trying to feel some kind of fear. When I was younger, I was afraid of everything. Now, I enjoy horror, and obviously, look what I'm doing here. But I'm constantly looking for the scariest image possible, the scariest video possible, and it doesn't work. So I can't help but feel she and I might be in the same boat. Scarecrow's ass might not work on me.
It's really funny that you should say that, Hatter, because what I was about to say was that I feel that I might be in a similar boat of someone who might, other than that would be incredibly unsafe. But if they made a recreationally safe fear toxin, I'm probably the type of weirdo who would take it. Because there are a couple of things that I'm afraid of, or especially was afraid of until I eventually became desensitized to it. One of those being heights. I really did not like heights, and to this day, if I am in a high or especially a precarious high position, I still get a lot of the physical symptoms of fear, the increased heart rate, and all that kind of stuff. But yet, I have, since I was a little kid, intentionally sought out things like that, the roller coasters, climbing up on things, all those type of things, because they scared me. So the idea that I intentionally chase things that legitimately scare me, I definitely resonate with Harlequin. So it sounds like the three of us are going to be teaming up and becoming a Batman villain team, and I am here for that.
That's great. I like that.
Okay, hang on. Sharon's interjecting, moving the microphone over for her.
Do I have to worry about you and Harlequin?
Absolutely not. My insane relationship with Harlequin will be completely platonic.
Mm-hmm.
Gray's in the doghouse. Gray's in the doghouse.
Yeah, and see, here's the thing. I can't be a distraction because, I'm not interested in finding relationships or anything like that. And you're both married, so yeah, you guys are both gonna end up in the doghouse if Harley Quinn teams up with us.
Like I said, I want to have a completely platonic madcap relationship with Harley. We're just going to be insane friends together. It's just friends, we're just friends, I swear.
So, in other words, you're going to try and convince the world that you're Harley Quinn's gay best friend. Got you.
Married, gay, for these purposes, it's completely identical.
I was going to say, it's the same thing in this situation. Exactly the same thing.
That, look, Harley, you're terrifying, but I fear my wife so much more than you. There is nothing happening here.
This is where she pulls out her mallet and she's like, are you now more afraid of me? And you're like, nope.
My wife pulls out industrial hardware. I think he's still more scared of me, and she's correct.
Yeah, I'll tell you, castration is a scary concept, but let me ask you guys this question. To you, what was the scariest Batman villain? For me, it took so many years, because he's not new anymore, and I feel old every time I say this, because this villain was new when I read his comic. Who remembers Professor Pig?
Yes.
I don't remember that one.
I know who you're on about. which always annoyed me because he spelt PYG, not PIG.
Well, there's a reason for that. The PYG is not a reference to the animal. I mean, it is in its own way, but it's a reference to the story of Pygmalion, which we can get into
Yeah.
a little later. But for those of you who don't know Professor Pig, here's what Professor Pig did. Professor Pig would kidnap people and turn them into what he called Daltrons. So he would, how can I put this in a way that is safe for YouTube? Castrate them, and that's why I thought of this. And cut their and sew these doll masks over their faces that couldn't come off, and basically fry their brain to the point where they just basically did what he said. They can't feel pain, so they'll keep charging. We see him in Arkham Knight, and I am to this day convinced that the fact that Professor Pig was in Arkham Knight is the reason the game was rated M for mature. But what do you guys think? What are the ones that scared you?
Okay, I want to pick something more niche. There of course there's the part of me that being a hipster, I can't pick a popular one, but I'm going to anyway because of course I want to say like Clayface, which I do love Clayface, don't get me wrong, and he has such a great body horror element, but I'm going to be the one to bite the bullet and talk about the mainstream one, which is Joker. Because yes, everybody's familiar with Joker by this point, and I feel that he's no longer properly appreciated for how scary he is because of our overexposure to him and the scary clown genre in general. But the idea of the laughing, happy madman who is going to kill you, murder you, torture you, do all this horrible stuff with a smile on his face while cracking jokes about it, there's a reason that we have overexposure to that because it is such a fantastic trope. It is so scary inherently that someone's going to pat you on the back, tell you that was super funny, and then stab you right in the throat. That is terrifying. I love that, and I just don't think I can pick someone better than Joker.
Joker would have to come up at some point. Yeah, that makes sense.
So, Ty, what would you say is your scariest Batman villain? Take your time, if you need to think for a minute.
I think mine would have to be Victor Zsasz.
Oh, yeah.
So Victor Zsasz is a serial killer, and he likes to kill people and pose his victims' corpses in like very lifelike poses, and he's very well known for using his own flesh as a tally mark for every kill he has. He completely believes that life is meaningless. The cycle of pain is just it's nothing. And he generally feels like that when he kills someone, he's saving them from life because life is just pointless. It's, just empty. There's nothing to life. He sees death as more of a benefit than anything, and he always says, and I'm really creeped out by this sentence, he always says he has a special place for Batman's tally mark.
You know, what I'll say about Victor Zsasz is he has quite a lot going for him in the scary factor. He's a killer. That's scary in and of itself. That is viscerally scary. But there's also his thought process. There's a psychological horror to that. It's something I like to call weaponized nihilism. If we don't know what I mean by that, basically, he has this really screwed up idea of the world in that, everything's meaningless. He's not happy to just have that for himself. He has to share it. And that's because that guy's coming at you. I mean, I could take him in a fight, but if he catches me by surprise, there's nothing I could say. And for me, if somebody was after me, my best skill, and don't get me wrong, I can fight. I was into boxing when I was younger, and I'm a big guy, but my best skill when somebody wants to in some way antagonize me is talking my way out of it. You can't talk your way out of it with Zsasz. His decision's made.
Well, and something I want to bring up about why I think he is such a great scary villain, and in some way scarier than other villains that, for Batman specifically, that are objectively scarier, is he's just a serial killer. He is probably one of, if not the Batman villains that is the most rooted in reality. He doesn't dress up as a clown or a clockmaker. He's not funny. He's just a very realistic serial killer. Yeah, he has a little bit of a specific philosophy, and maybe he's a little bit verbose and talks about things, but just in general, he's just a very realistic villain, and that anchoring reality, I think, is part of what makes him scary.
You ever see that show Gotham? You remember that?
Oh, yeah.
I kind of like that version of Zsasz better, not as a villain. He's not a better villain, because all that stuff we just said is what makes Zsasz a good villain. But he was such a fun character in Gotham. Do you guys remember him?
Yeah.
Like he was, what's his name? Carmine Falcone's kind of hitman. And he was less of he had that, don't get me wrong. He had that nihilistic kind of view on everything. but he had more purpose and he had a lot more personality than he does in the comics. He was actually somewhat funny at times. So, yeah, there's different ways to do the character. I think Gotham did him better as a character, but the comics do him better as a villain.
Totally agree. Now, I do want to kind of move along because something we already mentioned, because when we're talking about horror and we're talking about Batman, we have to talk about the Joker. Now, we already brought him up, but I want to spend a little bit of time because really and honestly, you could damn near do a whole episode on the Joker as just a horror icon and his different iterations. So to kick off our discussion I want to ask everybody who you think not your favorite, who you think the scariest Joker is. And we're including movie incarnations, we're including video game incarnations, we're including even different comic books. Everything's on the table. Just which depiction of the Joker it gets your vote for scariest.
I'll say this. For me, we all remember the arc, the Death of the Family arc, right? Where he got his face cut off.
Yeah.
That really, really got me. Because, for me, everybody has their one thing in horror that's kind of a weakness. It's anything on the face being badly damaged or disfigured or removed. So when I was reading the comic, and I didn't know that was coming, I saw that, I was like, we're going to read this later when I've had more time to, prepare mentally. So I'd say that one.
So what you're saying is Texas Chainsaw Massacre holds a very special place for you.
It does, and that's the weird part is, that stuff bugs me, but I also enjoy the fact that it bugs me, if that makes sense. I just got to kind of be ready for it.
Which is why we would both be fear toxin huffing D-list minion villains from Batman.
Exactly.
That's funny. I like that. I'm gonna have to use my brain now. I think Killing Joke would be up there because that's not Joker trying to ruin Gotham. It's not Joker trying to be a supervillain. It's Joker going out of his way to seriously piss Batman off in one of the most dark. I wouldn't say it was gruesome. I don't think gruesome is the right word, but it's definitely up on the lines of morbid ways possible. And then obviously got Under the Red Hood, which I think also is kind of falls under the same sort of barrier of Killing Joke. They're both very dark, twisted Joker moments.
And Ty, for our audience, just in case, go ahead and tell everyone what happens in Killing Joke of what you're referring to and why that's the darkest one.
So in Killing Joke, Joker figures out where Barbara Gordon lives. She gets a knock on the door. She just thinks it's just someone. She opens the door and Joker shoots her in a very fatal place. So now she's paralyzed from the waist down. And while she's laying on the floor bleeding, Joker ends up taking some pictures of her and sending them to her father, which is Commissioner Gordon.
Absolutely. And I feel like most people know the general plot of Killing Joke, but we always try to be as inclusive as possible and make sure that we're spelling everything out for everybody.
I think Killing Joke was one of my favorite Commissioner Gordon moments, too, because after all of that, when the Joker's trying to break him, trying to drive him to madness, and oh my God, the things he does to him, I don't even know if we can say some of them on the podcast, but no matter how far he pushes him, at the end, he's still Commissioner Gordon, and he still stands for what he stood for before. And there was for most of my life, Commissioner Gordon was just an accessory to Batman. But when I read Killing Joke, he actually became one of my favorite characters in and of himself.
Now, I will say Killing Joke, I think contains some fantastic stuff. It also contains one of my, or at least it is sort of the beginning / major allusion to one of my least favorite things to ever be included in the Batman comics, which is the relationship between Barbara Gordon and Batman. I have never liked that. I have never felt like that was appropriate. I hated that they did that with Batman's character. I know some people don't have a problem with it, but to me, it just felt icky as hell. I did not like it.
Now, to be fair, there might have been some allusions to it in the comics. That might just be the way they wrote it. I don't think it was intentional. That only shows up in the movie. And I will say this too. The movie was fantastic if you just skip that section of it.
Well, and now don't get me wrong. It's not that I don't like seeing things like that. I'm all for having fucked up stuff in a comic book. I'm all for giving characters weird things, and that it just to me did not feel appropriate to Batman because. And for a very specific reason, because Batman has the Bat family. So he has the Robins and Batgirl and all that kind of stuff. And it's supposed to be this very paternal relationship. And even though technically they are not related anyway, that felt very incesty to me. And while I know that I don't think they talked about it a ton in the comics, pretty much any of the later movies, comics, or whatever, they do treat the fact that the two of them had a relationship at some point as canon. And like I said, it's not, I mean, she wasn't underage, it was nothing like that, but just, it's weird. It felt weird to me because of the paternal relationship. That's just a personal preference, but I did not like it.
Oh
Yeah,
God, that means Tim Drake can go up to Barbara and go, "Hey, who's better?"
Yeah.
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 See what I mean? That feels gross, doesn't it?
Yeah, but this is the guy who literally goes up to a 9-year-old who's just lost his parents, gone, "Hey, want to kick the crap into some dudes with me?" You know, so.
But I sort of respect that. It's the part where, hey, want to go do some violence with me becomes, hey, want to get jiggy with it, is where that's where I draw the line. Maybe it's my American side that, hey, 9-year-olds, borderline murdering people is fine, but paternal relationships getting weird is where I draw the line. I don't know, maybe I'm weird, but I'm staying by that. That feels very icky for me.
Yeah, but this is also the same guy who catches a woman dressed in a very, very tight leather cat outfit multiple times, and then eventually goes, "Right, just to stop you from stealing stuff, let's bang each other." You know?
Listen, look at her and tell me you wouldn't do the same thing.
I will not confirm or deny.
Exactly.
Now, I will go ahead, circling back to our main outline, and answer my own question with the Joker. And don't get me wrong, there's so many Jokers that are so good. I mean, you could basically just take a dart and throw it at a board with them all listed, and you would pick a good one, including, I even think, like the old Adam West Batman Joker is highly underrated because he had a great energy and could be scary when he wanted to be. So, I mean, I love all the Jokers. I'm actually going to pick when the Joker is resurrected for Batman Beyond.
Ooh, good choice.
Oh yeah.
For one, I love Batman Beyond. If you ask me what is my favorite Batman-related anything, it's Batman Beyond. Terry McGinnis is my favorite Batman. I love his relationship with Bruce. I love Batman Beyond. And I am so beyond upset that we are at least currently not getting a Batman Beyond movie when we were going to for a little while, and then they canceled it, and I'm super upset about that. But for anyone who may not be super familiar with Batman Beyond, it's set in the far future. Batman is now too old to be Batman, and he has picked a protege to become Batman. Not a Robin in this case, but an actual Batman. And that's Terry McGinnis. And normally they're fighting a gang called the Jokers. That's kind of their version of the Joker in the far future, because the Joker is, of course, dead, because it's been a very long time. And at one point, basically, the Joker gets cloned, brought back to life. He's the Joker. Thing is, he's very weird looking. There's some body horror stuff going on, and he's like this super powered Joker. He's a super Joker kind of. It's complicated, but basically, he's really great. He's extra scary. And the reason I pick him specifically is because this is the time we get to see the Joker kind of break character. This is kind of the first time we get to see Joker break character, because he's trying to mess with Terry McGinnis, the new Batman, in the same way that he would mess with Bruce Wayne, the old Batman. The problem is Terry McGinnis has a sense of humor, and he's laughing at him, but not with him, and teasing the Joker. The problem is you're not even funny. And him actually laughing at the Joker causes the Joker to go into a rage, and the Joker losing the laugh and actually becoming angry is like so good, but also like scary in a super cool way. So I am picking the Batman Beyond resurrected Joker as my scariest Joker.
Oh, question. Same question for the Joker, but change it to Batman. What's your darkest, scariest Batman?
Ooh, good one.
I'm trying to think of what comic this was. I don't know that it was scary because it was just it felt so out of character. At one point in one of the comics, he straight up calls Robin a and smacks him around. I can't remember what comic this was, though. There's one where he's just really toxic and awful.
And the horror of that being Batman just acting out of character. So we could argue that is the horror of bad writing.
But if I'm picking one that is actually intentionally scary, this might be considered cheating, but I'm going to go with the Batman from the Arkham tapes, the analog horror series. More on that later.
No, totally allowed. Tell us a little bit about that Batman and why he's scary.
This is a Batman who, we all know that Batman's always on the edge of sanity, and he's holding on tightly. By not killing, he does that because he knows that if he does, he's going to lose it and just start killing everybody. So the scariest thing to me about Batman himself in general is the fact that anytime he could snap. Well, I'm not going to say anytime he could snap because he's got it pretty tight under control. I'll give him that. But in this one, he has snapped. What he's doing, he isn't killing, but what he's doing is just purely as a result of him snapping. And I don't want to give too much away because this is a series that isn't too old. And, typically when something's older, we just say, get over it. It's 20 years old. This isn't the case here. But we see like kind of mutations in him. We see him doing things to his body to make himself stronger in what he's doing. And at one point, they actually arrest Alfred because they're afraid they'll get in the way of Jim Gordon finding Batman because they're after. And that's usually the case in the beginning. They're after Batman, but they side with him. This is what happens if Batman just goes full tilt and it just is constantly, permanently them after him because he's a menace. He's a problem.
Awesome. And we will go in here in just a minute. We will go more deeply into the Arkham Asylum tapes, but we'll shelve that for just a second. But I agree that is a fantastic choice for a scary Batman.
Just the idea of him actually snapping is terrifying to me.
Now I'm going to pick which is kind of easy mode, but I also really want to talk about this one, so it's a great opportunity to, which is the Bat Who Laughs.
Yes, that's a good one.
Which, for anyone who is unfamiliar with that, this is essentially an alternate universe Batman where basically he and Joker swap positions, kind of, and where basically Batman gets turned into the Joker. So it is now Batman with Joker energy. And I don't have to elucidate why that would be terrifying. And I love the concept. And I kind of even wish we kind of got more of that. I kind of want that to get its own long comic book stretch. I think it hasn't had very much exposure. I watched that whole ass movie. So I love the concept of a Batman with Joker energy. And that just sounds terrifying to me.
Well, technically speaking, most of the type of Justice League-esque team that he makes, which is all from the negative multiverse, so all the numbers are in the minuses. Each version of Batman has done something or merged with or somehow claimed something to do with another member of the Justice League and makes they become their own characters. So there's Red Death, for example, who Bruce Wayne ties the Flash to the Batmobile and uses the Speed Force to go back in time, and it doesn't exactly go well. And then when he comes back out, he's now like a red armored blood color, I guess. He's like a darker red than the Flash. And when he runs, the effect of his Speed Force, he's got bats in it, but he's called Red Death, and even that's terrifying.
I do feel like you could take Batman, mix him with anybody, and then that new character is going to be terrifying.
So my pick isn't Batman, but it is Bruce Wayne. And it's a bit of an odd choice, but now that we're on this topic, I feel like I should mention it. The Bruce Wayne that we get to see in the Arrowverse Crisis on Infinite Earths crossover.
All right, tell us a little bit about him.
So basically, at this point in the crossover, the heroes have to go and find paragons. There's a paragon of truth, paragon of hope, etc., etc. And Batwoman and Supergirl get told, hey, there's a Bruce Wayne in this universe, go talk to him, he's going to be one of the paragons. And they turn up at the Bruce Wayne's house. It kind of looks like Wayne Manor, but it's never actually disclosed if it is. And we actually get a live action Bruce Wayne who's played by Kevin Conroy, who's the voice of Batman for many, many, many things. He's been the voice of Batman for years, and he's got robot kind of braces on his legs. He's very battered, very kind of the Batman Beyond type sort of esque Bruce Wayne. And Batwoman talks to him and they have a conversation on, hey, come be a hero again. And Bruce just laughs at her. He's like, why on earth would I be a hero again? Being a hero costed me so much, until I had to take matters into my own hands. Whilst they're having this conversation, Supergirl's in the other room talking to Lucius Fox's kid called Luke, who's now in this universe Bruce's assistant. And she's looking at this cabinet full of trophies that Batman took after he killed the superheroes. And the one that they focus on is the pair of glasses Clark Kent used to wear, which is not only broken, but it's also now covered in blood.
Dang.
I love that idea. I love a Batman who's kind of gone too far, and that being the actual horror of it.
I would like to point out that there's always this, when you're talking about the scariest Joker and, rating it, that some of the stuff with the Joker you really have to think about. There's this meme going around the internet of the original Adam West Joker.
Cesar
Romero.
Romero?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Romero.
Doing his thing, talking about, well, I turned the entire water source for Gotham City to Jello. And then Heath Ledger's Joker going, well, I slammed a man's head into a table and put a pencil through his eye, and having the O face on Romero's Joker. I'm sorry. Who do you think has the higher death toll on that? He killed the guy with a pencil. Romero's Joker caused widespread chaos. There's death, there's looting, there's all this. Yeah, it's silly, but just because it's silly does not mean it does not have a huge death toll.
Absolutely.
Okay.
I would like to point out that shutting off the fresh water supply to a city would kill way more people than stabbing one dude with a pencil.
And I have to say, even because if you just had Jello, yeah, you could hydrate yourself on that for a while. It's not hydration that's the issue. Because my first thought was, well, it's possible he didn't kill anyone with the Jello water, but you don't have running water. You can't clean things. Disease is going to go up. It's going to take him forever to fix that.
Well, and theoretically, if you had access to the Jello, you could hydrate yourself. But Jello doesn't flow through pipes, so no, the people of Gotham have no water. They don't even have Jello. So not only are they going to, it's going to be insult to injury where they can't even eat the Jello that is killing them.
Oh god, can you imagine laying there slowly dying in Gotham? You're like dehydrated to all like heavens, and you're there going, the worst part about this is I can still smell lemon lime.
How do you suppose Killer Croc felt about that? If the sewers were Jello too, what happened to him?
Nah, he's still there. He's stuck in like complete solid jello. He can't break out. It's the only thing that can hold him.
Have you ever seen the Mythbusters where they try to swim through syrup?
Yes.
It'd be like that.
Mm-hmm.
I saw the one where they walk on custard, all about non-Newtonian fluids. So if we think about it, Killer Croc, if he wasn't underwater when it happened, and he knows anything about non-Newtonian fluids, he's sitting pretty. He's down there. He's got all the Jello he could ever want. And I mean, we know he's immune to like all of the microbes that are in poop because he lives around poop constantly. You know, I like to think Killer Croc had a great time of it.
That was one of Killer Croc's golden. Please edit that out. That was one of Killer. That's a different Batman villain.
Well, I'll edit that out, but I'm not deleting it. I'm going to save it for when we need it.
Batman, kicking time at midnight.
I like to think that was one of Killer Croc's golden ages. And if you're wondering why I'm enunciating that, there is a piece of tape on the editing room floor where I mispronounced that word.
He forgot the R, folks.
Yeah, he said Killer Croc.
As a quick aside, I work at a lumberyard as my day job, and one of the things we sell a lot of is a product called caulking, C-A-U-L-K, which is stuff that's used to, fill gaps and go around windows and doors and that sort of thing. But I also live in Texas, where whenever people are buying caulking, they generally pronounce that with an O and no L, so I cannot tell you how many times someone has walked up to me and said, hey, can you show me your
That's excellent. That is fantastic. But on that subject, though, Killer Croc's a pretty scary guy.
Well, Killer Croc actually falls into a entire category of the horror of Batman villains, which is kind of the body horror, Island of Dr. Monroe, animal mutation horror, because there's Man-Bat, there's Killer Croc, there's all these type of characters that are what happens when you mix a human with an animal. And a lot of times Killer Croc is played for laughs, but I feel like at the core, he's a really scary concept.
Yeah, rolling back to the Arkham games, we all played Arkham Knight, right?
I feel like most people did.
So if you know what the Scarecrow's face looks like, it looks like that because Killer Croc basically ripped it off and Crane just decided to sew it back together with pieces of his mask. That's some pretty good stuff relating to Killer Croc, horror-wise.
I was going to say, and also Scarecrow, because that's just really messed up.
And very metal from both directions. I'm going to rip your face off. I'm going to sew it back on. I love that. I think that's super cool.
Scary, recognize scary. Should we get to work? Yeah.
So, I noticed that in our notes, someone mentioned Sirius House on Sirius Earth. Who wants to explain what that is to the people?
Oh, that's me. See, Sirius House on Sirius Earth was a very dark... You know what? It was a Batman comic. I don't have to say very dark. That's implied. The thing about Serious House on Serious Earth, though, and some of the greatest things about it is its artwork, and that's going to be hard to communicate through voice. It's all done in watercolors and just painted in really dreamlike look. But y'all, while you're listening to this, you can open up another tab, go to Google Images, just look up the comic, you'll see what I mean. The thing about Serious House on Serious Earth is Batman ends up in Arkham Asylum. We've all played Arkham Asylum. It's that idea. He's trapped there and he needs to get out. But he really gets into like getting to know the villains and who they are, and they really just painted them in a totally darker light. Like Two-Face, for example. You know, we all know Two-Face's shtick. He flips a coin to see if he should or shouldn't do something, and they take his coin away, so he literally cannot decide what he's supposed to do. So he is standing there. He's soiled himself. He's not eating because he just doesn't know what to do. And it's all stuff like that where they just took it to the darkest place they possibly could. And I would say, yeah, there's a lot of dark Batman comics. The one that has my vote for just not scariest, but darkest would be Serious House on Serious Earth.
And that's absolutely fantastic because it's bringing the realism and darkness into it. And so moving along so that we can get past Batman, because we can all agree we could spend all day talking about Batman. In fact, one of the things we have discussed doing is us all going on to Ty's podcast and just having nothing but a Batman episode.
Yeah, let's save some ammo for that.
But real quick, because this is very relevant to what we're talking about, but circling back to Hatter, I want him to explain to everyone what the Arkham tapes are and how this analog horror relates to Batman, and because analog horror is something we talk a lot about on the podcast. So Hatter, tell us about the Arkham tapes.
And you know that analog horror is one of my favorite things ever. But yeah, the Arkham tapes are just basically an analog horror like miniseries. They're just short episodes. I think they're roughly 10 minutes each. And they're kind of like these vignettes for the villains and for Batman himself. Now, there is an overarching story that leads into some Lovecraftian stuff, and I didn't see that coming. And sometimes I'd feel like that was maybe jumping the shark a little, but it works very well. So the idea is they took their idea of who these villains are. The Joker, for example, look up Joker Arkham tapes and just find the wiki page and you'll see what I mean. He kind of looks like Jeff the Killer. They kind of took the horror and cranked it up to 11, kind of the way that Serious House on Serious Earth did, but went more in a, what's the right word here? It's still psychological horror, but it's more in just like the horror direction. Everything's a little scarier. The characters are a little crazier. Batman himself is a problem. I mentioned this earlier. Batman himself, when they show a picture of him, he's all screwed up and stuff because my theory is that he's going in the direction of Batman of the Doom that came to Arkham. Did I say dude?
No, you said Doom.
I thought I said the dude that came to Arkham. The Doom that came to Arkham. It feels like it's going in that direction. See, I don't want to give away too much. I'm trying to be very careful here. But the Joker, for example, is just kind of depicted as a serial killer, but there's a bit of mystery to him. It seems like there's something beyond being a human serial killer in that his laugh is known to drive people insane. And that's where the Lovecraft influence start to come in.
I wanted to jump in real quick where you mentioned the Lovecraftian element and how you felt that was a little bit like jumping the shark. I kind of disagree because Lovecraftian elements are baked right into Batman. And it's right there in the naming. We've mentioned Arkham Asylum a whole bunch of times. Arkham is a location from Lovecraft. Now, of course, it's not an asylum in Lovecraft. It's actually where Miskatonic University is located. But Arkham, right there, the name ties Lovecraft to Batman. So there's already a little bit of like a hint that in Batman there could be some Lovecraftian cosmic horror stuff going on, which is one of the things I really like about Batman, and is one of the reasons you cannot argue that Batman has horror roots when they literally tie it to Lovecraft.
Now I'm going to have to, actually here, because actually there is an Arkham. Arkham is a place in Massachusetts in Lovecraft, but there is an Arkham Asylum in Lovecraft.
I didn't know there was an actual asylum. I know that Arkham has a lot of different parts it plays in Lovecraft, but there you go. That just proves my point even more, which if there is actually an Arkham Asylum in Lovecraft, then that's just a one-for-one borrowing and just anchors Batman in horror even more.
Absolutely. But what I was saying regarding the Arkham tapes, I don't want to give away much because it's really something that's just got to hit you as you watch it. But we see a few villains in it. We see Clayface, we see Joker, Ra's al Ghul. Ra's al Ghul is already, look, I don't know how to pronounce it, and I'm just going to say it the way I've always said it. He's already a horror character. He's a revenant and an immortal and a sorcerer, and they don't have to push him very far, but they do push him in the horror direction by basically, they just push Ra's al Ghul more to that revenant horror thing, kind of like they did the same thing in Gotham. In the show Gotham, they made him more of just this horrific thing that comes back from the dead. So for those of you who don't know, Ra's al Ghul means the head of the demon. I forget in what language. But the point is, yeah, the Arkham tapes, if you're itching for something that's Batman, but even more pushed in the horror direction, it still feels like Batman. It's something to check out. That's the Arkham tapes, analog, and search analog horror, because sometimes you'll just find the recordings from the Arkham Asylum games.
All right, and I want to kind of keep us briskly moving forward because we have so much to hit on here. And I also want to let all the listeners know that almost definitely we are not going to get through all the horror that is in comics that we are planning on. So we're actually already talking about having a part 2. So we're going to hit as much as we can and then look forward to Ty coming back on the podcast to do a second part because we have so much to talk about. The next part that I want to hit is body horror in comics. And I feel like because we already mentioned body horror in Batman a little bit, but body horror, of course, goes well beyond Batman. And I feel like the first thing we need to talk about when we're talking about body horror in comics is the symbiotes. So, Venom and Carnage and all that sort of stuff.
Ah, yes. They're actually one of my favorite things in Marvel Comics.
Same.
And I love the fact that that is a concept that is rooted in horror from the get-go. The idea that there's this alien being that takes over your body and you have to fight with it psychologically for who has control. Eventually, some of the characters even come to an understanding with them. But just the fact that you have this alien parasite, they call it a symbiote, but in a lot of cases, it's more of a parasitic relationship. It depends on which symbiote we're talking about here. But this thing flowing through your body, changing, mutating you, taking over. I mean, that is a horror movie right there. You just have taken that and put that into the superhero genre. That's a horror movie concept all by itself. In fact, we have a lot of horror movies that are based on that concept.
Yeah, I'm a big fan. Like, I would say outright that the scariest of the symbiotes is definitely Carnage and Cletus Cassidy for the same reasons as Zsasz.
Yeah, that's very true.
Absolutely. Just being rooted in reality like that. Now, I love Carnage, and I'm not sure I would say he's the scariest. I definitely, get it, and I wouldn't disagree with that necessarily. But to me, he's just my favorite because he is very violent and he's very angry. But at the same point, I always feel like he's having such a good time. Like, Carnage seems to really enjoy what he's doing, and I love that in a character.
Absolutely. That's why we love the Joker. Now, symbiotes also connect back to cosmic and Lovecraftian horror, because what was their source? Their source was Null. I feel like, Ty, you probably know a little bit more about that than I do, though.
About Null?
Yeah. I mean, I know who he is and the basics, but I'm going to be honest with you guys, I'm much more of a DC guy.
Yeah, I can quickly explain Null if people want me to explain who he is. So basically, he's a god of darkness and he's the creator of the symbiotes. And it's kind of like, I don't think it's 100% confirmed, but it's kind of rumored that he watched the Big Bang happen, and he would send out symbiotes across the universe to, well, they're parasites, so they feed off their hosts and stuff. So basically, he tried to take over the universe multiple times. And he's the all-being and scary big bad for Venom and Spider-Man and most of the Avengers. There's a storyline called King in Black, which is all about Null. And he's actually, if you know who Gaul the God Butcher is, and you understand that his sword, the Necro Sword, then the Necro Sword's actually used to belong to Null because it's actually a symbiote in itself, which not many people know about. And Null is just a stupidly powerful character. To defeat Null, Venom actually bonded with Eddie Brock once again, and then had an axe which was made from the Silver Surfer's surfboard and Mjolnir, and became like this glowing entity symbiote thing with a big badass axe, and that's the only way that they're able to kill Null. That's how powerful he is. He's got like symbiote dragons, which he rides, which is pretty darn cool, I'm not gonna lie. He's just, he's a really cool character, and he's the king of the symbiotes, but that doesn't mean all symbiotes listen to him. There's a whole thing within the symbiotes where they all are connected to the hive mind, they all can telepathically talk to each other, but Null can cut you off, basically, kind of like making you black sheep. Venom, Carnage, Toxin, there's quite a few of the very well-known earthbound symbiotes that aren't connected to the hive mind because Null obviously has banished them, air quote.
Well, and I want to jump in and say that you mentioned several things there that are absolutely tie-ins to cosmic horror and Lovecraft. For one, even the phrase King in Black is a reference to King in Yellow, which is a Lovecraft thing. So we have a tie-in there. And then, of course, him being an ancient deity that saw the beginning of the earth. He's the god of darkness. These are all very eldritch horror elements. So there's a great tie-in there. And that makes the symbiotes have, like Hatter said, this great tie-in to cosmic horror.
Yeah, another great thing about Null too is, as you mentioned, it's rumored, it's not confirmed, but that that he witnessed the Big Bang. It's commonly thought that the reason that they don't like fire or noise is because of that, because that was before the Big Bang existed, there was Null. And that was the first thing that could actually cause him any kind of discomfort, and that's why it became their weakness.
That's exactly, you've literally hit the nail on the head. So when the Big Bang happened, it just disturbed Null, because obviously it's pure darkness beforehand, and that's what Null was born into. That's literally what he's completely used to. And so yeah, that's why a lot of the symbiotes, fire or both, is kind of their weakness, because that's one of the reasons why Null wants to go around and take over the universe. It goes dark once again.
He just wants it to be quiet.
Mm-hmm.
Is that so bad?
Well, and I want to jump ahead a little bit. We're going to circle back to some of these because we have some more of comic book body horror to discuss. But you mentioning the darkness before the universe, and we did mention that we wanted to talk about some of the classic horror comics, and we're talking about from like the 60s and the 70s, things like Tales from the Crypt, which were some of the very early horror comics, Creepshow, that kind of thing. And those were very important because they influenced writers like Stephen King. And that's where a lot of our more modern horror concepts come from, these original old-fashioned horror comics. And the reason I wanted to reference that real quick and just talk about that, we can, circle back to that and to expand on that some more. But the reason I wanted to bring it up here is because, have you guys watched a movie called Demon Knight? Tales from the Crypt, Demon Knight.
A long time ago, and I'm going to be painfully honest with you, I remember nothing. I'll listen to you. You might be able to jog my memory a bit.
Okay, it was part of a whole idea of they were gonna, because of course Tales from the Crypt was a horror anthology TV series from like the 90s, and it was iconic, and a lot of people really loved it. I certainly liked it, although it was definitely scared me more when I was a kid because I was watching it when I was probably too young to be watching that kind of horror show anyway. But they had the idea they were going to start doing movies based on stories from Tales from the Crypt. And this was the first one they did. They did a second one called Bordello of Blood, which wasn't as successful, and then they never did another one. But Demon Knight is fantastic. And the entire idea is it's a bunch of people who are kind of pinned down in a hotel while these demon things are trying to get in. And the main character is this immortal guardian who has the special container full of blood that he uses to create these barriers to keep them out and all of that. And the actor who plays the main demon's name is Zane. He's this bald guy, and he starts off like dead serious, and then there's this moment where he just becomes zany as hell, and which is kind of a callback to the Joker-esque horror, where he's just funny and silly and absolutely terrifying. So he's fantastic through that. But the reason that I wanted to bring this up is because they explain where the demons came from. And it contains one of the iconic lines of horror, which is, in the beginning, there was darkness, but the darkness was not empty. And the idea that there were these demon things that existed before God created the universe, and they want to return it to darkness. And that's something that we see over and over again in horror. It's a really cool concept. And by the way, anyone who ever hasn't seen Tales from the Crypt, Demon Knight, you should check it out. It's hilarious. It's campy, but it's amazing. And I just wanted to call that tie-in because as soon as I heard Ty describing this character, the first thing that came to mind was the darkness was not empty, and it seemed to really resonate with that.
Are the demons really that bad? It just seems like, dude just wants his darkness back.
Well, is it really so bad that they just want us all to quit being such inconsiderate, noisy neighbors?
That darkness really tied the universe together.
I mean,
I don't think anybody got the reference.
I didn't know.
The carpet really tied the room together?
Oh, yeah. But so that was just a quick aside I really wanted to throw in there. We also, like I said, symbiotes are fantastic horror. They're body horror with a healthy dose of cosmic. So I want to talk about some of the other really interesting horrors. We have the Marvel Ruins, Marvel Zombies, Cancerverse. Who wants to tackle those?
I think those are all my additions.
All right, Hatter, lay it on us. Pick one to start with.
So I'm going to tell you guys this: when it comes to Marvel, when it's DC, I love all of DC. When it comes to Marvel, I tend to really gravitate towards the darker stuff. I think Ruins is a great place to start. So just imagine a universe in which, well, first of all, this will be easy. Imagine a universe in which there are superheroes, and it happened exactly the way you had it. Are you imagining that?
Imagine.
Sure.
So imagine a universe where the things that created these superheroes did what you'd expect them to do in real life. So we know how the Hulk came to be, right?
Which is, of course, through gamma bomb testing kind of thing.
Now, what do you think happens to somebody in real life who gets an unhealthy dose of gamma radiation?
We're going to assume horrible radiation poisoning and death.
So in Ruins, what happens to Bruce Banner instead is, yeah, he turns green and he starts to grow, but it's not muscles that grow. It's just he becomes a big living tumor. It's to the point where it puts so much pressure on his head that his eyeball pops out, and his bones are sticking out left and right. His body's mutating in ways that he can't even handle. And you want to know the worst part?
What's the worst part?
Years later, when this is being investigated, rumor states he's still alive.
Oh, Jesus.
Which is horrifying in itself.
So there's some body horror there, but the horror of, I mean, yeah, there's a lot of body horror in Ruins. In Ruins, like, for example, what's his face? The Speedster, Quicksilver. The X-Men are all under observation. They're all in prison because everyone thinks they're dangerous. And this is under the watchful eye of President Xavier. That should have put a chill into you.
I don't think anyone who has ever read the comics thinks Professor X would make a good president. He's barely a good leader of the X-Men.
True.
We know very little about President Xavier in these comics, and he's already horrifying. So he had the mutants locked up instead of teaching them how to use their powers and stuff. Quicksilver, they cut his arms and legs off so he couldn't run. What's his face? Cyclops. Now, we know what his problem is. What do you think they did to him?
Take his
I'm
eyeball
guessing
out.
that the removal of his eyeballs was involved.
Not quite. They sewed him shut, which to me, I can't decide if that's worse or the removal is worse.
But that wouldn't work, though.
But see, here's the thing, though. When his eyes are closed, the beams don't come out, right?
Okay, yeah, sure.
Cyclops is so freaking complicated because it's hard to say what would and wouldn't work because his character is a little bit inconsistent. For one, just as a weird aside to throw out there, you know those aren't lasers. His eyes are a portal to a universe of pure energy, and those are actually kinetic force beams shooting out of the portals in his eyeballs.
And there's some cosmic horror right there.
Legit.
You know, I hadn't really ever thought of that, but okay, let me horror up Cyclops for you there a little bit there. His eyes are portals, normally just energy comes out. What if something lives in that world and decides it wants to try to get into our world, and it's going to attempt to do that by crawling out of Cyclops's eye portals?
See,
I want to see that.
you say this, but the mutants themselves are also kind of hard because as soon as they, hit a certain age or whatever, they can go through mutations. I mean, just look at some of these weirdos. People turn blue. People have bone claws. People have, I don't know, the ability to touch stuff and they explode. Portal eyeballs.
Oh, absolutely. And I do feel like they spend some time with that. I mean, one of the main characters that I feel does touch on the horror of the X-Men is Rogue. When her power comes in, she kills anyone she touches, and one of her main backstories is her boyfriend that she almost killed or did kill, or that varies a little bit from iteration. But basically, she can never touch another living person ever again. So, I mean, they definitely embrace the horror. So that's yet another thing of, we talked about how much Batman is horror, but X-Men is horror too.
Yeah, I have to say, there are two things that when somebody says hit that, it could mean kill, or it could mean, with Rogue, it's both. But yeah, I'm sorry. I'm going to circle back, just finish my thoughts on Ruins. The scariest thing about Ruins to me, the most horror thing is that it's so freaking depressing. Like, we look at comic books, there are these worlds that we look into where there are these great, amazing things happening, and it flips that on its head. And I think that was the worst thing about it. When you're reading that, that's the worst thing about it. Also, the fact that, what's Kingpin's real name?
Fisk.
Wilson Fisk. And there's also the fact that Wilson Fisk is watching the mutant prison, which is utterly horrifying. There's this idea that it just, and they say this throughout, the whole through line of the plot is the main character is trying to find out what went wrong and what made this universe the way it was. And there's just a kind of I don't know how to put this, just like this chill that gives you, like this idea, what went wrong? And it's like Murphy's Law in the form of a comic. It's one of my favorites for that very reason, just because comics, even at their darkest, always try to lean towards the hopeful. And this does the total opposite. At the very end of the story, this isn't much of a spoiler. You'll see it coming at the very beginning, but the main character dies without ever figuring out what the problem was. And you have, of course, Nick Fury, who is, it's the white version of Nick Fury. I'm not sure if that makes a difference, but who is heavily implied to be a cannibal and heavily implied to have learned it from Captain America. And I don't want to spoil any more for it because I think every Marvel fan should read this one. But yeah, no, Ruins is probably, to me, the thing that really got under my skin more than any other horror comic.
And I just want to elucidate something that Hatter kind of mentioned, but that the entire thing of Ruins is this is one of the alternate universes in Marvel. And in this universe, something went horribly wrong where all of the superheroes who were supposed to get powers instead go through these much more realistic and horrifying experiences. The main character who's trying to figure out what happened and what went wrong, that's the whole thing, is he's trying to figure out why this universe isn't like the others.
Yeah, and to be clear, he's not aware of the other universes. He just has this hunch, and that's, to me, is scary too, because if you really get into that mindset, this idea that you know things are supposed to be different, that you know things are supposed to be better, but you can't put your finger on why, to me is even scarier.
And I also, kind of as a little bit of an aside, but I do want to mention it, you mentioned Kingpin. And I love Kingpin as a character. I do want to say, am I alone? I know I'm not alone in thinking that the original Daredevil movie was not that great. But did anyone else really love Michael Clark Duncan as Kingpin?
I'll be honest, I haven't seen that movie.
Do you know who Michael Clark Duncan is?
I know the name.
He is an actor who played some amazing parts. Probably the most famous for playing John Coffey in The Green Mile. He's famous for being a muscular black actor with a resonant, deep voice, and he's just a super cool guy. He seemed like he would be really, really nice. I would watch him in anything, and he plays Kingpin, and he's like one of my favorite Kingpins ever.
Yeah, didn't he just die recently?
Some time ago. I mean, I think it was a few years ago, but yeah. And I was deeply upset because he's just one of my favorite guys.
Ty, have you read the Ruins series, or is that new to you?
I've read some of it. It's one of those comic books I kind of have to get back into and figure out where I was. But I know more about the Hulk storyline than anything else, because I think that's one of the most popular ones.
Yeah, that's the rough part about that one.
Yeah.
It's like it's hard to stay into it because there's a bit of levity, and I'm not afraid to give it away. It's such a small part, but there's one little bit of levity, and it's really, this is just pure black comedy. But you know Ghost Rider, what he looks like, right?
Mm-hmm.
You know what his head looks like. So in this story, he was an actual a stuntman in a carnival, and his story is he decided to do a big jump on his motorcycle, set his head on fire, screamed into the night, disappearing, and that's how he died.
Oh, jeez.
And I think they need that bit of levity there, though.
I was going to say, you mentioned how Nick Fury is a cannibal. It reminds me of my one of my favorite alternate versions of one of Spider-Man villains, which is Vulture from the Noir universe.
Now, how did that go?
So basically, in the Noir universe, Agent Toomes isn't like some old guy who, builds a suit that could possibly keep his cancer at bay or whatnot. He's an actual cannibal, and that's where he gets the nickname the Vulture, because he has a big pointy nose, and he's bald-headed, and he's quite... his body's a bit lanky. You can kind of see his rib cage a little bit. He's really scrawny and everything. He's a bit hunched over, and the way that he sits on perches kind of makes him look like a vulture. And he's a cannibal, hence why the prison guards gave him the name Vulture. And when Spider-Man Noir fights him, he eats Uncle Ben.
Oh
my God!
I'm having some Uncle Ben's for dinner. Oh, wait, that's not what you meant, is it?
No.
Oh. So on that note, that's obviously not the only darker, more, what was the word I'm looking for? More dismal Marvel universe. There are many, but a lot of people agree that one of the darkest ones is the Cancerverse. And the name kind of implies a lot about the story. There's this idea that there's this universe out there where Mar-Vell had cancer, and he was afraid of dying, and there's another, actually, Mar-Vell in the Ruins also had cancer because they put all the Kree on this reservation, but we're done with Marvel Ruins. Y'all can read it. But in Earth 10-011, yeah, whatever, the Cancerverse, they defeated the Avatar of Death and everybody was immortal because of Mar-Vell's fear of dying. And so, what happens if everybody's immortal? You obviously know nobody dies, but what happens if they continue to keep reproducing?
Of course, we're talking about massive overpopulation and horrors related to the fact that even if you can't die, horrible things can still happen to you, and that would be terrible.
Yup, and they come back. If horrible things happen to them, they come back from it. But here's the thing. That's not a problem when you have more universes to colonize, right?
So they begin spreading to other universes.
Yep, another reason they call it the Cancerverse is just that. They're spreading to other universes. Now, Immortality, they're also... I gotta reread this one, but I know they're also allied with the Many-Angled Ones. We all know who that is, right?
Go ahead and sum it up for everybody.
So the Many-Angled Ones are like... Ty, you might know. What's the guy's name? With the tentacles and stuff?
Oh, Jesus, now you're getting me to think.
I can't remember.
When you said that, my first response was to go Cthulhu, but no, that's not who you mean.
He's more like Yog-Sothoth than Cthulhu.
Oh yeah, Yog-Sothoth, Cthulhu. Actually, Lovecraft always said that while he thought calling it Lovecraftian mythos, or not Lovecraft, but while calling it Cthulian mythos was somewhat accurate, he thought Yog-Sothothian made more sense.
Yeah, but that's a mouthful.
The funny thing is, it's actually linked to Cthulhu Mythos.
Shumagorath.
That's it.
Now, the original name that they changed from, we're not going to say here because it's got a very bad word in it. But yeah, Shumagorath, they're allied with him and the Many-Angled Ones in the Cancerverse. So beyond not being able to die, they're able to come back. I believe directly relating to them. Again, I need to reread it. But the whole story is them going to war. And like, one of the scariest things about that is not only the idea of this existential idea of them just continuing to grow until there's just nowhere to go anymore. It's the idea of just the fear of death becoming something that can be weaponized, because the whole idea is they took it out because Mar-Vell was afraid of dying. And the fear of death, and what I like to call profane immortality, I'm sure somebody else has said that before, the idea that immortality is not always a good thing, and it's a bit of a played out kind of trope these days. But the idea of immortality being an actually terrifying thing is something I always really enjoy. So yeah, the Cancerverse, the Fantastic Four, for example, is allied with the Lovecraftian forces of the Many-Angled Ones. So they call themselves the Fhtagn Four.
Which I do love, again, the direct Lovecraftian reference with, Cthulhu Fhtagn being something that is a phrase which people say from Lovecraft.
So now I don't want to go into too much spoilers, but because this one is one that I feel people really need to read. And I was careful on spoilers on the last one too, not spoiling anything that's really central to the plot. But the whole war here is two universes, one much bigger than the other, mind you, going to war with each other, and that these people need to find a way to give them an avatar of death. So that's the whole kind of, defying the actual rules of their universe. Excuse me. And it's where we're introduced to a lot of concepts like, oh God, now I can't remember this word. Give me a sec. Concepts of things like Galactus, actual genuine forces of nature in the universe. And I can't remember what the actual word they used for it was. I'm sorry. But for example, the Cancerverse has this thing they call the Galactus engine. So it's basically Galactus, but it's made mostly machine, and it's just his head, and it's about 30 times the size of our Galactus. So it's also the horror of just things continuing to evolve and change to the point where it becomes even scarier with time, despite the fact that it's their normal.
Well, and also there's the elements there of humans interfering with the natural order of the universe and how horrifying that concept can be.
Have you read these ones, Ty?
Yeah, so it's been a long time since I've read it, though. That's the issue. I've read a lot, but I also research a lot, and I obtain strange, peculiar information about comic books. You lose some of it.
So
yeah, that's my problem. Like I managed to usually vault a lot of it, but I should have reread this particular section of comics, but I gave you the basic idea. I'm sorry, Gray, what were you saying?
Oh no, I just said I wanted to move, keep us moving towards, because there's something that ties into that I definitely want, and I know we all three had a bunch to say about, is the idea that the power of healing factors, much in the same way that the inability to die for the Cancerverse holds its own horror. I love the idea that everyone tends to think of Wolverine's healing factor or Deadpool's healing factor as a good thing. And there's definitely a lot of horror hidden in that power, because that means a lot of really horrible things can happen to you and you will survive them, and they can keep happening to you.
Yeah, I think you need to develop a degree of insanity to keep surviving things like that.
Oh, just use the Deadpool movies as an example. In movie 1, he gets his hand chopped off, and in movie 2, he gets torn completely in half, and he regrows those body parts. Obviously it's Deadpool, and it's a Deadpool film, so they make it joke. You know, we have some like humor thrown in there, but realistically, if you got torn in half, knowing full well that everything from the waist below will grow back to full size, but you have to wait a couple of days for that to happen, that would be not only horrifying but really disorientating, because you'd be half your height or whatever the case may be, you know, and then you've also your brain would have to not relearn, but would have to figure out that, oh yeah, I've got my legs back, by the way, you know, I can stand again and all this jazz. Like, it's not just as simple as being torn in half and your legs grow back.
And I want to add both a very realistic comment here, which is that people who undergo a lot less injuries than that end up with horrifying trauma. So it would be incredibly traumatic. And then as an element of humor, you're going to be sitting there really hoping everything grows back to its previous normal size.
All right, so I seem to recall a while back, a friend of mine and I were shopping for records at a thrift store, and one of our catchphrases as a group became, "It's all Engelbert Humperdinck," because that's all it was. So for this particular episode, I'm going to say, "It's all Batman," because most of it was, but we're running out of time on this episode, and we really want to talk about a lot of things that are horror in comics, and we scratched the surface on some of it. But I think we need to wrap up part 1 and do a part 2.
Oh, absolutely. I totally agree. There's so much more to talk about, even just in the vein we were just on, where we were talking about the healing factor and alternate universes. We have to talk about Deadpool kills the multiverse. We have to talk about Marvel Zombies. And that's just on that thread. We have a whole lot more to talk about. So Ty is going to have to come back. He doesn't get a vote. We're just going to kidnap him and bring him back on the show.
All right, yeah, cool. Part 2, part 3, whatever it takes. I'm down.
We'll send
And
Deadpool
also-
to get him if he decides to back out.
Also, everyone, make sure that you are checking out the Tiger Nexus and all of Ty's other channels. We'll make sure to link those in the comments and everything. Make sure you're checking him out, because we are also going to at some point appear on his show talking about comic book related things, probably a lot of Batman, could be anything. There's no telling what we end up actually talking about. So make sure that you're following him on everything. Ty, is there anything specifically you want to tell them, where to look for you, how to look for you, what you want them to follow, anything like that?
Yeah, if you guys want to check out my podcast, it's the Tiger Nexus podcast. It's on Spotify and Apple Music and YouTube and wherever else you find your podcasts. And then if you want to check out any of my other content, Tiger 777, and that link tree specifically has pretty much every channel that I have. You'll find things like gaming, artwork. I draw, you know, Ben 10 Aliens, Pokemon, and Digimon and stuff. Audio dramas. I tell all sorts of stories, including Batman, including and you know, I like to explore my own like multiverse type stuff. So yeah, there's something for everybody, really.
All right, and we want to thank Ty for joining us. This has been fantastic, and we look forward to the fact that we get to do some more of this. And with that, I'm Gray. Thank you for joining us on Liminal Radio.
And I'm Hatter, and we want to thank you once again for joining us on the Station Between Stations, where we explore the best rabbit holes in horror. Ty, do you have anything else you want to say?
Thank you for having me, boys. It's been absolutely blimmin' fantastic. I can't wait for part 2.
We'll see you next time, folks.